What does it really mean for an AI to think? Today, we're diving deep into interview.net, Azure Cloud. The .NET Cloud Interview Revolution Enterprise .NET workloads are now overwhelmingly Azure native. 75% of production .NET apps run on Azure. Yet technical interviews haven't evolved. They still measure C trivia, not cloud architecture. The consequence: 63% of cloud engineering hires underperform in their first 6 months, costing enterprises millions in delayed migrations. Interview.net Azure Cloud is the first platform that makes cloud-native .NET competence observable. It replaces recall-based assessment with live, simulated architecture challenges. This is not interview prep. This is a new standard for technical hiring. But here's where it gets interesting: the signal noise crisis. Standard .NET interviews probe syntax, framework trivia, and algorithmic puzzles. When Azure is assessed, questions rarely go beyond name 5 Azure services. Candidates can't demonstrate how to design a resilient Event Hubs ingestion pipeline, implement a circuit breaker with Poly, or right-size Cosmos DB partitions. Hiring managers make decisions in the dark. The result: 60% of cloud roles are filled by engineers who can't translate .NET expertise into Azure architecture. The talent crisis isn't a supply problem, it's a measurement failure. So what's the real problem? Let's talk about the abstraction gap. Preparation resources treat .NET and Azure as separate universes. Learn C collections from one book, memorize Azure service tiers from another. No integration sandbox exists that lets you prototype a distributed transaction spanning durable functions, service bus, and SQL database with real latency and failure modes. Without that feedback loop, the mental model remains shallow. The candidate knows what a queue is, but can't explain how poison message handling works in an Azure function triggered by service bus. The interview gap is a preparation gap. This raises a critical question: the simulated interview engine. Interview.net Azure Cloud introduces live architecture simulation. The platform generates authentic Azure plus .NET scenarios on demand. Candidates provision real resources, write code, and observe telemetry, all within a temporary sandboxed subscription. An AI evaluator tracks 140 plus signals, latency budgets, retry policies, idempotency handling, partition strategy, connection resilience, and security posture. After the session, a replay with coaching overlays pinpoints every architectural decision, right and wrong. It makes the invisible visible. For the first time, interviews test real engineering, not memory. The engine replaces uncertainty with evidence. Now let's zoom in on the SIE stack. 5 layers, 1 truth. L1, scenario generator parses job requirements, selects complexity, e.g., event-driven, serverless, hybrid. L2, Azure Fabric auto-provisions real resources, functions, AKS, Cosmos DB, event grid, with realistic throttling and failures. L3, .NET Execution Surface runs candidate code with open telemetry hooks, capturing GC pressure, cold starts HTTP retries. L4, Decision Analyzer scores architecture against well-architected framework pillars, cost, reliability, security, performance. L5, Coaching Cortex generates a time-lapse replay with contextual micro-coaching. All layers operate inside a secure, ephemeral Azure subscriptions, zero cleanup. Here's something most people overlook: core modules. 5 integrated modules power the engine. Scenario library, 200 plus curated enterprise patterns, CQRS, event sourcing, Strangler Fig, anti-corruption layer, and multi-region active-active. Live sandbox, temporary Azure subscriptions with pre-provisioned services governed by Azure policy and cost quotas, ensuring no cleanup burden. Code trace, instruments.NET runtime for exceptions, latency spikes, thread pool starvation, HTTP poly retries, and Dapper sidecar telemetry. Architecture validator, automated well-architected review with compliance scoring, referencing Azure Advisor Security Benchmark and Reliability Workbook. Feedback Cortex, AI-generated coaching cards mapped to specific moments, delivered via IDE extension or web dashboard with diff against optimal solution. Think about this for a second. The 45-minute interview loop, from spec to scored replay. Ingest role description parsed into competency graph identifies required Azure services, architecture styles. Generate engine selects a scenario, e.g. migrate a .NET monolith to AKS with service bus, implement resiliency, execute. Candidate writes .NET code and configures Azure services via portal/CLI under a 30-minute timer, real latency, real failures. Observe. AI monitors code changes, portal actions, metrics, logs capturing 140 plus signals. Score. Immediate, transparent rubric aligned to cloud adoption framework. Replay. Time lapse of every decision with coaching overlays. And this is where things get complex. Trivia versus applied mastery. Old model, Q&A about Azure Functions runtime versions, storage account replication, and reserved capacity pricing. Candidate passes by recall but can't design. New model, design a high-throughput order processing system using event hubs, Cosmos DB, and durable functions. Ensure idempotency and handle partial failures. The candidate provisions resources, writes code, and demonstrates handling of session affinity, cache invalidations, and autoscale. The system captures every decision, comparing against a reference architecture. The hiring signal shifts from knows facts to can build. But here's where it gets interesting. Proven lift. Pilot cohort, 1,200 .NET engineers across 18 enterprises. Pass rate, 22%, 68% PN01. Time to offer ready, reduced from 11 weeks to 6. First-year performance of hires using SIE, 4.15 versus traditional 2.85. Hiring manager confidence score, plus 3.25. 91% of candidates reported deep understanding of Azure plus Net synergy. 94% of managers agreed I could fully assess cloud architecture skills. Mishire rate within first year dropped 40%. Candidate NPS plus 62. The platform turns assessment from a gamble into a strength signal. So what's the real problem? Let's talk about integration fabric. Native extensions, Visual Studio Code, GitHub Actions for scenario CI/